Do you know what your love language is? Do you know what love languages are? If you are in a blended family, do you have any idea what your stepchildren's love languages are? Today we speak to Ron Deal, who is the co-author of Building Love Together in Blended Families, The 5 Love Languages, and Becoming Step Family Smart. He is a marriage and family author, conference speaker, and a licensed therapist. He is also the founder and president of Smart Stepfamilies and the director of Family Life Blended, which is an initiative of Family Life. He is also a podcaster for Family Life Blended show. Today, please welcome Ron Deal to the Teaching Your Toddler show. Hello, this is Mary Jo Tinlin from Teaching Your Toddler, and today our guest is Ron Deal, who is an author, teacher, and therapist, and we are going to talk about his book, Building Love Together in Blended Families, which is a co-authorship with Gary Chapman from the 5 Love Languages. Ron, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It's really an honor to be here. I've been looking forward to it. So I've been in marriage and family education and ministry and therapy for about 30 years now. And so I've worked in a number of places, currently work for a very large nonprofit that works internationally, that pours into couples and tries to equip them for successful family living and parenting and things like that. And I run a division called Family Life Blended. We specialize in working with blended families. And so that's everything from helping couples make sense of what's going on in their life, in their home, and helping their children, as well as helping community leaders, therapists. I do therapist training, and ministry leaders who maybe work in a local church or a congregation setting who are trying to help couples where they live. So we kind of do both ends of the spectrum, equipping couples for life and equipping leaders to help couples.
It's amazing. I'm part of a blended family, and I'm always shocked considering how many there are of us, how limited the resources are. So it's wonderful to talk to you. It's wonderful to find out about this resource because I do believe that a lot of us are struggling. We're trying to make this work, and it's really, really hard, which we'll talk about a little bit, I think. Mm-hmm. So your book is with Gary Chapman. How did you all get connected to put this book together?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been a fan of Gary's and his work, the 5 Love Languages, for many, many years. And actually, I've been doing what I've been doing for almost close to 30 years. And he was an early endorser of my work. And so we became friends. We met at a conference. We would meet up every year or so and have a conversation, have a meal and talk. And one day it occurred to me, this is one of 9 books that I've written on blended family living. Of course, Gary's written prolifically about a lot of things. But it occurred to me that one of the things that Gary has not addressed as it relates to applying the 5 love languages is the unique circumstances that apply to blended families. So we were sitting there having a meal one day, and you can imagine I was very nervous, talking to one of my heroes saying, I think you missed something, in all the work that you've done. And he's a super humble man. And so he was very open and just said, yeah, tell me what you're thinking. And I said, well, everything you've written about the 5 love languages, and, maybe we should talk about what those are in case somebody listening is unfamiliar, but so many people are familiar with that concept that a lot of people, you can just assume they kind of know about it. But I said, it's all based on an assumption. And he said, what's that? I said, the assumption is the person you're trying to love and find their love language and love them that way actually wants you to love them in that manner. What if they don't? Or what if they're confused about you loving them in that way? What if you know the heart of what really communicates love for somebody, but they're unsure they want you to love them in that way? And he said, you're right. That is an assumption that's built into all of my work. And I said, blended families don't start with that assumption of familyness, if I can use that word. I like to make up words, by the way.
I like that word. I was going to ask you about that word, so let's talk about that later.
Yeah, we'll do that. So they don't have the assumption of familyness. Like step-parents and stepchildren have to figure out how to become family for one another. And a step-parent who's eager and very much wants to step into this child's life, and they have goodwill towards that kid, says, "Oh, your love language is physical touch. Well, I'm going to give you a bear hug." And the kid's like, "Get out of my face. I don't want that.
Don't touch me.
Don't touch me." I mean, that's way too much. I don't know who you are. I like you, but I don't like you to that degree. Like, I don't feel that comfortable with you in my life. And so all of a sudden, what is meant to express love becomes a source of conflict. And that is a
Yes.
very common, real experience for people in blended families. And so he and I decided we've got to write a book. We've got to talk about how to apply them, the love languages, and how not to apply them, and why all of these things happen. What are these nuances in blended family living to make sense of that for people who just don't understand why? We did a little survey before the book, Mary Jo. I'll just end with this. And 70% of people who were already familiar with the five love language concept were confused about how to apply that in their blended family. That told us we need to write this book.
Absolutely, for sure. So, really quickly, could you just briefly review what the five love languages are?
Yeah, well, first of all, the concept is simply this. You love somebody, whether it's a spouse, a child, a friend, and you want to be able to communicate love to them in a way that is really meaningful. And so, just like if you were to go to a foreign country where they speak a language different than the language your native tongue, you would want to learn their language in order to communicate in ways that they fully understand and hear and receive what it is that you're trying to communicate. And so it's sort of like that. There are five very common ways that people express love one to another. And everybody needs all five, Mary Jo. A lot of people get confused about this. Everybody needs all five, especially young children. We're talking to parents of toddlers today. They need all five constantly because it may be around age 5, 6, 7 or so that their one primary love language begins to sort of float to the top, and you can begin to see it. But don't start trying to focus on one thing too soon with young children. And then I would say even adults need all five. But there are moments where you really want to communicate something meaningful. And when you want to do that, um, go to their primary love language because it really hits their heart more strongly or deeply, perhaps is the way to say it, than some of the other languages. So the five love languages are words of affirmation that it compliments, and somebody saying something that makes you feel good about yourself, that builds you up. Gifts, anything that you give to another person. And as Gary Chapman says, it could be a rock, but if there's meaning attached to the rock, I saw this rock today and it has a certain shape and it made me think about who you are and the character that I see in you. And I just wanted to give you this and say, I really love that about you. And that meaning is the gift, right?
Mm.
Sometimes you spend a little money, doesn't have to be a lot, but it's the meaning behind it. Physical touch, touch on the arm, on the elbow, a hug, holding hands with a spouse as you're driving down the road. All of those things communicate really loudly. Quality time is the fourth one. So just spending time together. That's my wife's love language, by the way. If I
Mm.
really want her to just feel special to me, I need to carve out some space in my schedule and orchestrate some time together. It doesn't matter really what we're doing, honestly, but time is that thing that communicates my heart for her. And then the fifth one is acts of service. So this could be doing something for the other person, emptying the dishwasher, when it's not your turn, and just doing something kind for the other person that takes something off their agenda or just helps them with their schedule during the day. For some people, that just speaks the loudest. Wow, you really love me. You really care for me. And that's really meaningful to me. So words of affirmation, gifts, physical touch, quality time, and acts of service.
I love the concept. One of the concepts that was new to me from reading through your book was the dialects that happen within there, that they can actually be subtle. And you talked about quality time with your wife. There was an example in the book of one spouse, the prior spouse thought quality time was one thing versus the current spouse thought quality time was another thing. So there are some nuances within that, right?
Yes. So people who speak English have different dialects within English. You go to different parts of the country and there's different accents, or there's different terminology or wording, or they just say it in a little bit different way, but they're getting at the very same meaning. Those are all dialects. In likewise, we all have a dialect to how the expression of this love language, what it looks like. So back to that example that you were talking about, one guy we interviewed, he said, "Oh man, my first wife, her love language was quality time." But for her, what that looked like was doing things side by side, just being out together. We could be walking, we could be doing a task in the yard together, and that really counted as something time spent together. He said, we divorced. A few years later, I married my second wife, and her love language is quality time. He said, my first thought was, oh, I got this one down. I know exactly what to do. And so he would orchestrate doing things side by side. And she was like, no, watching TV, that's not quality time for me. It's you and me looking at each other. And maybe there's some conversation, and it's focused on our usness. And that equals quality time. Well, okay, well, that's unique and different, and that's just a different expression or dialect of that particular love language. The point is, we've got to study the people we love, whether it's a child or a spouse or whoever it is in our world, in our life. We got to study them and learn what it is that really counts.
That's amazing. So the book is called Building Love Together in Blended Families, subtitle The 5 Love Languages and Becoming Step Family Smart, which is your brand, Step Family Smart. Is that right?
Yes, it is. Most of my books, the Smart Step Family, the Smart Step Mom, the Smart Step Dad, it's all about helping people understand. What do I mean by that? Helping them get smart about what step family or blended family living is like and why it is what it is and what you can do about it. We really believe that is a game changer for blended family relationships when people understand what's happening and then can make choices so that they move in toward familyness together.
Oh, that's fantastic. So we do have some copies of the book that we can give away to people if you comment on our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or if you send me an email to subscribe@teachingyourtoddler.com. We have some copies that we will be able to give away for this. So one of the great things I think in the book is that you actually have a survey, not just for the couples to find out what their love languages are, but you also have the surveys that are specific to teenagers and children so that you can all sort of figure out what that works or how that works for your family as a group, right?
Yes, and the surveys are really good. I mean, you can go online to 5lovelanguages.com and do it online, but you can also get it within the book. And here's the unique thing about it. Let's say you're trying to discover one of your child's love languages, not so much your toddler, but let's say you got an 8-year-old. There's a couple of ways you can do it without the survey. But the survey really helps. It really helps when you just kind of write down a few things and then compile that information up into, what is their primary love language. Again, everybody needs all 5 over time. But when you really want it to count, it's good to know what that primary love language is. One of the things you can do as a parent is just make observations about what your child does to express love. So here's the giveaway, whether it's a child or an adult. We all tend to do or to speak, if I can say it that way, the love language that we prefer to receive. And so a child who's always drawing pictures and handing you, say, Mommy, I love you, and just is giving you gifts. Mommy, I made this for you. It's a pile of, I'm not sure what that is, but thank you for that gift. That's a kid who's probably got a love language of gifts. They would love to receive something back from you. A child who always wants to be in your lap is very physical and touching and holding. Maybe it's physical touch. Again, those are hints that show you in that direction. And yes, this does apply to spouses as well. And even yourself, you might begin to think about, what is it that I find myself wanting from my husband or my wife? And what is it that I am always looking for and wanting to get? I give lots of compliments. I'm always complimenting on this or pointing out that or saying I appreciate this. Maybe it's words of affirmation. Having that realization about yourself opens the door to, yeah, that's sort of what I long for. And wouldn't it be great if my husband knew that? And he was like, oh, and then you start trying to figure out what their primary love language is. This is ultimately, here's what this is about: service. It's about serving your spouse, serving the people you love in ways that are deeply meaningful. You love them. You want to be able to communicate that in ways that really touch their heart. This just moves you closer to that bullseye.
Thank you. That's an amazing way to sum it up. But but now you do note in the book that love in a blended family looks a little bit different, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It's defined differently. And everybody can understand what I'm about to say, even if they've never really thought about it as it relates to a blended family specifically. If you got married, you acquired a mother-in-law and a father-in-law and maybe a brother or sister-in-law or five of them. And, just immediately, there's some relationship that's already been built. Sometimes people have spent lots of time with their future mother-in-law. And so by the time the wedding happens, there's a pretty deep connection there. And other people, like we lived across the country from them. And so we had 5 conversations, period. And I don't even know them at all. And so the question comes, all right, now you're married to their son or daughter. How do you introduce that person? Within 6 weeks of getting married, do you say, this is my mom? There's some people who introduce their mother-in-law as, this is my mom. There are some people who hear what I just said and said, we will never introduce her as our mom. And here's why. And, there's a clear distinction about who is family and who is not. Everybody can relate to this. You have friends, deep, close, personal friends that you would tell your worst nightmare and just your biggest sin to. You have other people that you would never let into that space, into your life or your heart. There are people who you're friendly with, but they're not BFFs, right? Okay, same thing's true in a blended family. On day one, you have people that are family. These are the people, we call them insiders. You're biologically connected. This is my brother, my sister, my mom, your family. That's well established. We have the same DNA, we have the same bloodline, same ancestry, history. We came through the same crap together when the family came apart. Like, we have been through hard, we're family. Now you over there, stepbrother, stepmom, whatever the case may be, I'm still trying to figure out how to define this relationship, where to put you in my heart. I like you, I love you, but I don't love you like I love my parents. So how do I love you and how much? Well, I'll tell you some things, and there's certain things I like doing with you. But that doesn't mean I let you into the really deep, intimate places of my heart and my life. So there are expressions of love. And I think one of the big mistakes that step parents and bio parents make when they get married is the assumption that, hey, you and I love each other. Our kids are going to come along pretty fast. They already seem to approve of you and us, and it's all good. And so all of a sudden, the adults think we're family with the kids, but the kids are like, well, you're like my mother-in-law. You're family, you're family, but you're not my mom. And I don't like you acting like you think you're my mom. And I don't like you challenging my relationship with my biological mom. Like, that gets in the way of what's really important to me. So if adults don't understand this, Mary Jo, they make the big mistake of what I call blendering. They're trying to blend the family so hard. They force expectation on the children for a close relationship. They sort of demand love at a depth that only a child can decide if they want to give. You can't walk up to a new coworker at your place of work and say, "Hey, I'm your new best friend." You can't do that, right? I mean, they're like, "Who are you?" and get out of my face. Like, no, you're not. Just because you ask for it or demand it doesn't mean I'm going to give it. And likewise, it's a big mistake to blender in a blended family. It creates resistance rather than softness. It makes people harder and withdraw and lean away rather than soft, move toward and open up. So timing is everything, and respect of those boundaries is everything.
That that's so interesting. I don't think people would think they wouldn't think that you're a blended family, even if you aren't remarried. You are a blended family because of your in-laws, like you said. It's not something that even if you've only been married once, you are a blended family. That is a really good way to look at it. I know I wrote this sentence down from the book. It says, in some step families, only the couple has a need for a good blend, while the children are fine if it never happens. So sometimes it might never happen, right?
That's right. That's right. It depends on the expectation. Let's do an example that sort of makes the point. There's a lot of people later in life these days. I bet you some of your listeners right now are going, oh my gosh, that's me. I'm the adult stepchild. My bio parent at the age 55 or 60 or 70, just got married. And I became an adult stepchild. Like, that's weird. Like, my dad's new wife is not my mom, but gosh, she lives with my dad and she's at every Thanksgiving and birthday and she's a part of the family. And she brought, her adult children and grandchildren. So now there's 15 new people at our house at Thanksgiving. It doesn't even feel like family anymore. Like, I don't know how to go home because that's not my home. The people there are not my family. And yet I'm expected to think of them as family. That's a very common experience that people have. And so you are defining those new relationships and trying to get to the heart of, how do we do this? What does this look like? Let me give you a quick little analogy I think lots of people can relate to right now in our world. We're experiencing this, how do you define the relationship thing socially across the world, across the globe, and it's because of the pandemic. 6 feet away, wearing a mask. That's what they tell us we should be doing. But then you go into the world, and guess what? There's some people who think 6 feet away really means 2 feet away and no mask. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
walk into the grocery store and they're comfortable being right next to you, and you're like, I'm not so comfortable with that. Or maybe you're the one who's like, yeah, 1 feet away, that's good. I'm not worried about it. Other people are like, no, 6 feet away really means 10 feet away with a hazmat suit on.
Mm-hmm.
Only then am I going to feel comfortable with the closeness or distance between us. Same thing. Like, my dad's new wife, I want her 10 feet away with a hazmat suit on. That's the only thing that I feel comfortable with. But she thinks it means 2 feet away. We got a problem. Like, we have got to figure out how this works, what it looks like. Have you walked into a social gathering and kind of looked at somebody like, are we shaking hands? Are you shaking hands? Are we still doing the elbow bump? Like, that's defining the relationship. Same thing happens in blended families on day one. One of the things we put forth in this book, that one of the wisdoms is, okay, now that you understand this dynamic, how do you bond with a stepchild? Or how do you navigate that little space? Well, you can actually have a conversation around it with some people, some children. Like, they're old enough that you can have a dialogue like, hey, how do you want to introduce me? I got a new book coming out in a month called Preparing to Blend, and it's all for engaged couples before they get married. And one of the things we tell them is, have a conversation around, how are you going to introduce me after the wedding? We're, quote, family. When your teacher at school, or one of your friends, are you gonna what word do you want to use to introduce me? Is that mother-in-law or is that mom? Is that my husband's mother? Like, what does that look like for us? Mama Deuce, stepmom, bonus mom. Like, there's all kinds of fun terms, but what's comfortable to the child and to the adult is what the answer is. People say all the time, Ron, what's the right answer? What term should we use? I have no idea. You have to co-create that in a way that makes sense for both of you and is comfortable for both of you. And when you get to that, that's the right answer. So we invite them to dialogue. What does 6 feet away mean? How are we going to do this? How do we start? And by the way, this is not where it's going to end up. You're going to start there. Over time, as the relationship grows, then that 6 feet away or 10 feet away with a hazmat suit on might actually become 8 feet and no hazmat, or 6 feet with a mask, or, it will grow and change and evolve. But let's just get started with today.
Mm. That's a great analogy, I think, and having that book, Preparing to Blend, is going to be such a great tool for parents, especially as they go into this remarriage. Because I read in this book that it takes 5 to 7 years to merge the family on average, right?
It does. It is very much a year process, multi-year process for most step families, not months, not
Mhm.
days.
Which I think a lot of people need to manage that expectation for their
Yes.
family. I loved the analogy you had in there. You spoke about blendering, because and blenders have sharp edges, right? Like,
Different
instead of a
blades.
slow cooker where we go into the recipe as full vegetables, right? And over time it blends and softens and becomes a stew, right? I love that analogy.
Yeah, how do you cook a step family? It's with a crock pot.
Mhm.
Blenders and microwaves, fast, high heat, they destroy all the ingredients and just sort of force them together. Nope, that doesn't work. In real life, You want a lot of respect. Each ingredient for the other. Here's where you're at. Here's where I'm at. Let's find what we have in common. That's what we call low heat. In a crock pot, you do need a little heat, but it's low heat. It's not a pressuring, high heat forcing. It's a gentle. What do you and I have in common? Let's start with what. If I asked you, Mary Jo, to go out and make a new friend today, like, hey, you got a new neighbor 2 doors down, go make friends with them. What you would not do is bang on their door, force your way in, and demand they give you something to eat.
Right.
That's not making friends, right? What would you do? You would knock on the door and wait. And if they came to the door and started talking through the door, you would have a little conversation through the door. Tell them who you are. Tell them why you're there. Gently, perhaps, have a conversation when they open the door. You don't force anything. You make friends slowly over time. And then you go back and you go back, and then you invite them over to your house. And one of these days, they invite you in and, hey, would you like a glass of water? Like, we start sharing of ourselves. But that only comes with trust and finding things we have in common that naturally bring us together, and then we discover more things we have in common. That's the same principle that step-parents, step-children, step-siblings need to have with one another. And when you do it at that gentle pace, over time, that's crockpot, you finally get to something that's really good.
Oh, that's great. I know that in the book you talk a lot about what we're really looking for is that need to feel safe and loved, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's ultimately what everybody's looking for. And let's remember that a blended family is not the beginning of the family story. It's the middle. And what I mean by that is there has already been a lot of loss. There's already been love and then love lost. There has already been stability from a child standpoint and then instability. There's been unwanted change and transition for kids left and right for many years, often before the blended family even starts. And guess what? I hate to say it, but more often than not, from the child standpoint, the new step family is another unwanted change. I want mom and dad to get back together again. I don't want mom marrying somebody new. So from the child standpoint, it's more change and loss, change and loss. And if then, so that makes them sensitive, hypersensitive to people pushing into their world and asking for more from them. And hey, you should be happy that we got married and you now have a stepbrother. Aren't you thrilled? Like, all those expectations on top of the pain that a child has experienced are really irritating. So when we, again, force a lot on a child and then expect love and connection, it's just a recipe for conflict. And so adults got to get this. I don't care if the children are 35 years of age, they don't want anybody forcing themselves on them. Or if they're 5 years of age or 15 years of age, they have a timing of their own. One of the things I've learned about cooking, I'm so not a cook, but one of the things I learned from a chef, he heard me talking about this crock pot analogy one time, and he said, you know what, Ron, you're right. You can't fool food. Mary Jo, I had no idea what he was talking about. I said, so what are you saying to me? He goes, you can't make an ingredient cook faster than it will cook. If you're going to make stew and you throw celery and beef and carrots and potatoes and spices and water into a crock pot, each ingredient will cook on its own time. Celery may be faster than the beef. Carrots may be faster than the potatoes. They each have their own style and their own timing, and you cannot force them to cook faster than they will cook. It's built into who they are. Each ingredient in your blended family, adult, child, doesn't matter, has its own cooking style and pace, and you need to find it and work with it. Otherwise, you end up destroying that ingredient's ability to soften and then share of themselves. So think of it this way. Let's apply a love language principle. Here's very practical, okay? So you find out your 14-year-old stepdaughter's love language is physical touch. And you're a toucher, and you'd love to give her hugs. And you try that, and it backfires, and she bristles. I mean, you can feel it. It's clear. She's uncomfortable with that. So what do? Well, you back up, and you try to find a form of touch that she can receive from you at this point in time. And it might feel very impersonal to you. It might be that gentle touch on the arm when she's headed out the door in the morning for school. Just something very slight, and you're like, man, was that even meaningful? I don't even know. But it's what she will receive from you. Now, she turns the corner and gets a bear hug from her dad and her siblings. She's all about that with them. Why? Because those are defined relationships that are clear and safe for her, but
Hmm.
it's unsafe with you for whatever reason. All right, don't be offended by that. It's not personal. It's about the ingredient. But what you got to do is trust that over time, little touches on the elbow will open the door to, oh, maybe a little shoulder nudge, or, when you're joking and having fun, or before bedtime, something that's a little more physical. And one day it's a side hug. Someday, with time, maybe, can't guarantee it, but maybe it'll become bear hugs. And when it does, that will be genuine, authentic, and a bi-directional hug. She will be giving and receiving because it's meaningful to her at that point in time. You just have to trust that we're starting soft and then moving forward is the way to go.
Oh, that's really great. I love how you sort of explain the progression, because it is something that takes time. And oh man, I love that food analogy. That's such a good one. That, I mean, I think that makes sense for everyone because we all eat. So thank you for that. I have one more question for you, and then we'll wrap it up. But is there how does it change the dynamic when you add a child that is now a half sibling? Does that change anything about the family?
Yeah, first of all, let me just talk around this a little bit because there's some things we know and there's a lot we don't know about this. Okay. And let me just say, I do talk about this in a number of resources that I've written. The Smart Stepmom, Smart Stepdad both have entire chapters on that subject. I have my own podcast. Family Life Blended is the name of the podcast, the Family Life Blended podcast. And we've done episodes on this subject. So if people want to learn more, there's certainly places where they can dive in and learn more. Here's, from a research standpoint, it's a little hit and miss. I mean, what we think in general is true is that, whatever is true about your family before you have that first hour's baby will be true after. So if there's a lot of harmony, there's a lot of cohesiveness, people have come together nicely, there's been some time to cook, and things are sort of stable after the marriage and forming of the blended family, then the hours baby can help solidify that. It's sort of like, at last, somebody we're all connected to equally. Now that's a lot to put on a child. Please hear that. That's a lot of expectation. But if the family's already there, it makes it easier for them to go there. But if there's conflict, if there's hardship, if a step parent, for example, is having a real rough time with a stepchild, or maybe two or three of them, and now they have their own child. Imagine a stepmom who feels like an outsider and isolated in the family and has a hard time with her stepchildren, and then she has her own child. And all of a sudden, this child is easy. Those kids are hard, but this is easy. This is mine. And I'm comfortable, and this baby is totally into me, and we can really connect, and there's no question about the nature of our relationship. Hard is hard, easy is really attractive. And now the rift between step parent and stepchildren gets bigger, gets wider, gets deeper. Now that contributes to more family division, not less. So it seems to be driven by the overall health of the family, the timing of the new birth. How do other people see it? Are there kids who are in this home only sporadically, or are they really a part of this new child's life? How does their life change as a result of the new baby? There's a lot of questions there. The one thing that, what's the takeaway for people? If you're considering having an hours baby, I would ask you to just pull back and look at the bigger dynamic and wonder with each other as husband and wife what you think the impact might be. Spend a little time studying and reading and thinking about it. And if you're already moving in that direction, then it's like, be very intentional with the other relationships in the home, because this transition will bring some ripple effects, some wanted, some unwanted perhaps. And so just don't take it for granted that that everything's going to work out. Years ago, there were actually some people giving advice to folks, and they said, yes, have that concrete child. And what they meant by concrete is, it's sort of wet cement in your step family. You need to have a child that will be solid and concrete everybody else together. Well, that was bad advice because people did it, the timing was poor, their family wasn't ready, and it made things worse. There's no evidence to support the idea of a concrete child making things better across the board. What you got to do is have some wisdom. You got to think about the bigger picture, look at it from the other children's point of view, and then perhaps the timing of having the hours baby is what you will adjust.
Oh, that's fascinating. I had never thought of it that way, so I'm so glad you sort of explained through that. I've never heard concrete child. That's interesting. So, well, thank you so much for talking to us today. I mean, this has been a fascinating interview. I feel like I could just keep talking to you forever. But you spoke about your podcast, the Family Life Blended podcast. You have your new book coming out, Preparing to Blend, which I wish I had 15 years ago. I wish. But I'm so glad to hear about that. How else can people find you?
Yeah, find us at familylife.com/blended. familylife.com/blended.
Perfect. And again, just a reminder, please, if you would like a copy of this book, the Building Love Together in Blended Families, please comment on our Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter for Teaching Your Toddler, or send me an email at subscribe@teachingyourtoddler.com, and we'll try to get you a copy of this book. Ron, thank you again so much for joining us on the Teaching Your Toddler podcast. It's been a pleasure, and I know this is going to be a very helpful episode.
Thanks for having me.
This has been the Teaching Your Toddler podcast with Mary Jo Tinlin. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you'll find us on our website at teachingyourtoddler.com, as well as on Facebook at Teaching Your Toddler, on Instagram, and on Twitter at Teaching Toddler. So join us again, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Thank you so much.